What is up, guys? It's Sky, and it's time for another episode of Battlefield 5 Flight School. And in today's episode, I'm going to talk about how you should set up your options to be the most effective for playing gameplay in Battlefield 5. First things first, go into gameplay, and in my opinion, you need to tweak the minimaps. For the flight zoom, you want at least 250 because that's the range of the air radar. It's up to you if you want it to be bigger. I don't really rely on the air radar, and I don't want it to be too intrusive, so I don't want my minimap to take up too much space on my screen. And after that, go into the advanced settings, plane chase camera roll. A lot of people ask this in the comment section of YouTube videos. If you set this to on, your viewpoint in third person will rotate as you roll your plane. If you turn it off, you have essentially the Battlefield 3 camera where the viewpoint stays fixed and it doesn't rotate when you roll your plane. So that is personal preference. I set it to off because most of my viewers prefer it to have it off, but there's pilots out there that do great with it on. It's up to you. Next, you want to go into controls. I fly controller, and I haven't really touched keyboard or mouse controls in a really long time. I don't really plan to. If I had to choose, I would fly keyboard only. In my opinion, is better because I just don't really like lifting and dragging a mouse, and I'm not gonna get into that. But as far as flying controller and Battlefield 5, in my opinion, you need to max your vehicle sensitivity. Then you need to go into the controller tuning options and max. Actually, you need to lower the max input threshold of whatever your pitch stick is. Now, unfortunately, if you're playing infantry, you're probably going to aim with your right stick. I pitch with my left stick. I pitch and roll with my left stick because I do what they call the southpaw configuration. The default configuration has you pitching and rolling with your right stick. And if that's the case, then you may not want to mess with this setting, or you might have to lower it if you're playing planes and then raise it again if you're playing infantry, which is kind of a pain in the butt. But basically what it is when you're pitching and rolling on the same analog stick, you're always going to have the diagonal, which is going to be the maximum input for both your pitch and your roll. And at that diagonal is, it's 50% input for both the vertical and horizontal. Now, I set it to 40% because I want to have a little bit of room to be able to reliably hit that max pitch, max roll. It's like a little 5% buffer on each side, so that you can actually pretty reliably hit that setting. But set this lower and it'll help you. I didn't want to set it too low because if you set it too low, then it might affect your aim when you're trying to line up on your target. And in advanced settings, set your plane control sensitivity to max. Now, this is interesting because in Battlefield 1, I did not max my vehicle sensitivity for public matches because I found that it was too sensitive and there was no way I could aim. But in Battlefield 5, you turn really slow, so I really haven't had a problem aiming with max sensitivity. And your maneuvers will be better, so you just do it. Turn your brightness up a little bit. It helps on some maps. Oh. Third-person vehicle field of view needs to be maxed, and you're at a pretty big disadvantage if you don't max that out. So max that out. In the sound settings, I use 3D headphone, and I disable any other type of 3D sound mixer. Like if you're using a mix amp from what's that company that makes the headphones? Forget. Anyways, if you're using a mix amp or if you have like Dolby headphone or something, disable that and then use 3D headphone in the options. It works pretty good and I have no complaints. Now, I use a custom configuration for flying on my gamepad. Obviously, I pitch with the left stick, roll with the left stick, rudder with the right stick. My throttle is mapped to my bumpers, RB or R1 and L1 for the brakes. And I also map the third person view, first person view toggle to the left trigger or L2, and then fire my weapons with R2. And that's just really intuitive for me, because if you're playing infantry, you aim down sights with your left trigger and you shoot with your right trigger. I put my zoom on D-pad down. Obviously I switch weapons with triangle or Y, and I put my equipment on X and circle, or B and A if you're on Xbox. And the reason I do this is because you need to be able to switch equipment or change your weapons without stopping turning. If you pitch with the right stick, then for you to keep turning, you need to map toggle equipment to the D-pad, and you need to map switch weapon to the D-pad. And obviously this is why I have it mapped on my face buttons, because I pitch with my left stick. Another thing to note is I have zoom, which is zooming your first person view, on D-pad down. And the reason I can do that is if you go into controls, you can set vehicle zoom to toggle. So when you click the button, it'll zoom, and you have to click it again to zoom back out. Big thing in Battlefield 5, I like to map my self-repair to my L3 or clicking the left thumbstick. That way you can maneuver and self-repair at the same time, which is really important in Battlefield 5. And if you notice, one of the keys to the way I map my controller is that to access key functions like the brakes or the throttle or shooting or changing my camera view, all that I can do without taking my thumbs off the thumbsticks. I can have complete maneuverability while I'm doing those things. Auxiliary things like changing weapons, you just want to be able to do it when you're turning. Like say if you're kind of strafing the ground at an awkward angle, you need to be able to switch weapons and drop your bombs and pull out. So I put those on the face buttons. I can give up my rudders for those things. And then the spot function or the comm rows, I put it on the D-pad because I have nowhere else to put it. And it's not that big of a deal in Battlefield 5 anyway. And seat switching, I put it on the D-pad because again I have nowhere else to put it. Now if you're flying on PC, a lot of people like to use the mouse and keyboard controls, and they're really good controls because the mouse lets you have really subtle control of your roll, which is important in creating maneuvers when you're flying. Now the default controls assume that you're using mouse and keyboard, and actually I prefer to fly keyboard only because there's times when you need to make a continuous roll, and obviously you always need to keep pitching up, and there's times when you need to pitch down. So I just prefer to have it all on the keyboard, and if I need to vary my roll, I just tap 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 if I want to roll slower. Now the default controls assume that you're using mouse and keyboard, so the rear cam is always mapped to your middle mouse button. So you need to map it to a keyboard keystroke, and I like using right control. Now, otherwise, the default controls are really good for keyboard only. Only thing I would kind of change up if you're going to go the mouse and keyboard route is that you should kind of consider mapping your pitch and your roll onto a keystroke or a thumb button on the mouse. Obviously, pitch up, you need to have that as a keybind if you're going mouse and keyboard, because 95% of the time when you're flying, especially in an engagement, you're going to want to keep turning, you want to keep pitching up. A lot of people like to put that on spacebar. I actually, when I used to fly keyboard and mouse, I had a custom configuration that was kind of complicated, but Now, the keyboard and mouse setup has the cannons or your weapon defaulting to the spacebar, and that's not necessary because obviously you're gonna want to shoot your cannons with your left mouse button. So change spacebar to pitch up is something that a lot of pilots do. And then some pilots like to bind roll to a thumb button. So that'll help you out a lot, I think, especially binding pitch up and roll to a keystroke or a thumb button. And those are really the only changes I would make. Otherwise, the default controls are pretty good for mouse and keyboard. Now, mouse sensitivity is something that kind of varies from person to person. Or the vehicle mouse sensitivity. Some people like it high, some people like default. And in my opinion, I kind of like to have it low. And then obviously you can have a keybind or a thumb button mapped to roll if you want to do a hard continuous roll. But play around with that. But I never really settled on a sensitivity that was great for me. I never really liked my mouse and keyboard controls. So lately I just fly controller on PC, and I do okay, especially in public matches. Anyways, guys, those are my settings and my reasoning for my settings. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, guys, and I'll catch you later.